Good morning. I'm here with Rob Evans, who's a clinical psychologist. Is that right?
Yes.
And also the author of The Human Side of School Change, which brings me to want to talk to Rob. So I'm wondering if you could just describe a little bit about how you see teachers experiencing efforts to influence their practice.
So I'd have a couple of immediate takes, John, about this. One of them is that, to me, a context is always king. And so when we think about professional development, and whether we focus on the content of the programs or the formats or whatever, or we think more broadly about what it is we believe teachers need to learn in terms of expanding their capacity. To me, the larger context, especially these last 15 years, is one which is really inimical to sort of professional growth, because wherever you go, what you see in even the best public school districts are people just swamped and overwhelmed. A second thing, I've always been interested from the get-go, and when I first was writing The Human Side of School Change, interested in the problem of resistance on the part of people who are the targets of innovation, in this case, teachers. And one challenge here is that there's a real difference between someone's assessment that teachers in a district need certain kinds of professional growth and the readiness of those teachers to do the professional growth. And the confusion of need, or the misreading of need as readiness, or the ignoring of readiness, is to me a major obstacle in professional development, because it leaves out the key issue, which is the teacher's motivation to change. And so that even top quality programs that are delivering state-of-the-art information about curriculum and instruction, say, if they're being presented to people who don't have a need of their own, a sense of readiness, I want to do something different, then to me, we've missed a major part of what would make PD really effective. And in this regard, the last thing in this little mini sermon here would be that so much professional development complaining that I hear from teachers is that essentially they feel like people get brought in to scold them, to point out their weaknesses, and to demand and insist that they be different and do things differently. And so there's a whole piece that, for me, has to do with the motivation to change and how you create and build and sustain that. And then I'm interested and concerned about the quality of the programming and how it's developed and what's in it.
So there may be a mismatch between the desire of the leaders or the program and where teachers are at. Yes. And is that just a insurmountable issue? Or are there things that you can do to close that gap, or make teachers more receptive to what you're introducing?
There's a tremendous amount of the effort for change has been essentially saying to teachers, what you're doing isn't good enough. And I've been in lots of schools where that's true, actually. But nonetheless, the question of how you deliver the why we need to change, why you need to pay attention to this, what difference this can make, that piece to me is often left out. So that I've been a big believer for years, though I'm not the inventor of it, that you want somebody to change, they have a right to know why, what, and how. Why can't I keep doing what I've been doing the way I've been doing it? What am I supposed to change to, and how am I supposed to get there? I go to district after district where there's a cursory why the test scores aren't good enough. And there's a focus on what, the new curriculum and when the PD sessions will be held. And so you get some how, some what and how, but not a real addressing of the why, which is where the motivational stuff all lies. And how you find a way to say to somebody, essentially, there are better ways to do what we've asked you to do, what we've hired you to do. And do that in a way that both makes clear that there's a need to change and yet doesn't dump all over the person or ask them to essentially discard, what they have built their own practice around. That's often, to me, a real challenge.
There's a lot of will, I believe, on teachers' part to make to do better. They just don't know what it is that they need to do better. And I'm wondering what your reaction is to that.
Human brain is hardwired to seek and cling to patterns. And we do that because it's biological, it's how our brains work, but it's psychological because it's what makes life meaningful, a pattern. And people, all of us, cling to patterns even when we don't like them because they provide meaning. This is a reason that you have no trouble finding teachers all across the country who seem to hate everything about their current school and any idea for fixing the things they hate. So they say, the schedule here sucks. Say, I think that's probably, let's get a group together, see if we do something about the schedule. Oh, no, not going to do that again. And it doesn't make logical sense, but it makes psychological sense. People cling to the patterns. And school itself depends hugely, more than most other occupations, on continuity, not innovation. Most of what we're teaching, most of what teachers do is help kids prepare for the unknown future by teaching them about the known past. I don't just mean history, but and it's an occupation that draws conservators, not innovative entrepreneurs as a group. As a group, teachers are among the least risk-taking types of workers you can find, and for good reason. So what you need in school typically is a lot of creativity and periodic innovation, but it's not like software development and you're retooling the whole line every 5 years. So to many teachers, the constant stuff about change feels to them like the same old merry-go-round. It's just something different this year. Mm-hmm. And most of them have the ones who've been around a good while, have a lot of cynicism because of all the things they've been assured are going to make a difference and which are then abandoned the next year or forgotten. I never forget a wealthy suburb where I worked, an elementary principal said, you could say the motto here is, you name it, we started.
As you've looked at, ramp up patterns that make sense for the why, to answer the why question, what have you learned?
So the art is to somehow find a way to do two things, which is to make a case for why we need to consider this. I'll come back to that in a second. And also to be clear that some pieces of this are not negotiable, but that we're not going to abandon you. We're going to try to find a way to sort of help and support you and so on. And a key challenge about all this for me is that for lots of people who are teaching, asking them to abandon a practice they have integrated into their work for a long time is not just swapping a new technology, so to speak, or approach for an old one. It's asking them to abandon a whole meaningful pattern of how they became who they are professionally. So if I'm a lecturer and you want me to do much more interactive classroom instruction, and you think you're offering me additional tools that will make me a better teacher, if I stay with you, that's probably true. At the beginning, I'm going to have to give up something that I'm wedded to, that I learned from my mentor, that's my definition of how instruction works, and become a novice again at something else. So the more the PD is aimed at what I'll call a thorough retooling of teachers' skill sets, the more likely it is to cause a greater loss and bereavement in the early going, and thus make it harder for them to make the leap over to where the PD would like to get them at the end. So loss is, to me, you want a synonym for innovation and change that would be every bit as accurate as growth and development. It would be grief and bereavement. Because I'm bereaved when someone I love dies, but I'm bereaved when an assumption I take for granted is devalued. Right? So you call me in and you say to me, Rob, you're just lecturing at the kids, and we know from Howard Gardner and a ton of other research that kids do better with a whole variety of instruction, and we don't want you to do that anymore. And I bought you a couple of books on interactive strategies, and I've saved some money to send you to a couple of conferences next year. So I don't feel like you're giving me a gift at first. I feel like you've stabbed me in the heart, because what you said to me is you don't value what I do, who I am, what it means to me to be a teacher. Because my notion is I'm a repository of the wisdom of the Western world. Empty vessels file into my room, and I fill them with the precious nectar that I've distilled over my years of, right? Here's the key. You can't get me to change if you don't cause the bereavement. You have to. But when you cause the bereavement, I'm going to have a harder time than you might wish at first making use of good PD that you would give me. I think the art of this really is to be able to say, we have to do this differently, and here's what we need to do, and we're going to have to work on this together. But this is the other thing for me. I've sat in with tons of administrators who've tried very hard to get buy-in for their professional development programs and for new stuff, and we're frustrated at the lack of it. And the problem is that buy-in, if it requires people to bereave themselves and buy into something new, it's not all that likely. Sometimes what you have to be willing to do is realize that buy-in is an end state, not a beginning condition. And you have to therefore be willing to run the risk of some discomfort, really discomforting people, to create the readiness for something to change.
This reminds me of an old debate about the sequence between trying to change beliefs versus practices.
Yes.
And so where do you stand in the sequencing of those two things?
That's a great thing. So you're thinking about whether people need to be convinced first or they need to behave first. And
Yeah.
So this is interesting, because I've read a bunch of stuff which says that if you think of people who are true embracers and those who are merely compliant, right? They haven't really bought in, that actually their behavior isn't that different. And that therefore you could sort of make do with the non-true believers. And I think there's some of that's true. I also know this. There are some things, just as a teacher knows with students, there are some things the students won't believe they can do until you make them do them. And if you waited for or the coach waited for the kids on the team, waited to be sure they could do it before trying to get them to do it, it would never happen, or at least very, very late. So I do think there's an appropriate place now and then for saying, you have to do this. I know you can do it. It's hard. I'm going to help you, but you have to do it. But I don't think, there have to be a lot of places. You have to be willing to go there. I guess that's what I would say. But you certainly don't want to just be riding roughshod over people and ordering them around, especially if they're teachers on tenure and professional status, and they're not doing well and not doing it, and you can't or don't want to get rid of them. So there's a balance to be drawn here. But I certainly am a believer that teachers benefit, the change process benefits, and therefore professional development benefits when it's clear what's negotiable and what isn't. To me, PD works best when it begins from a place that really is in tune with where they are right now. Not just in terms of their skill sets and their practice, but sort of motivation and stuff.
Rob, it's been so wonderful to talk to you. I really appreciate your time, and I learned a tremendous amount from hearing about your work. Thank you so much.
It's very stimulating to be, prodded this way. Thanks for the questions. They're very good, John.